Double check. Thank you, Angus. Again, my name is Kevin Dandry. I'm a professional engineer, a professional traffic operations engineer. With me is Rebecca Dean, somebody from our team at TEC. It's a pleasure to be in front of you this evening, and I'm going to give you an overview of the types of things that we're going to be looking at. But ultimately, we are in the infancy of our process, and what is most important is that we hear from you. The folks that experience the Main Street corridor every day, whether it's by car or by foot or by bike or on the knees, and a lot of equestrian activity too. So with that, we'll get into. There we go. What are our goals? Again, as we start on any assignment, we want to make sure that everybody's aware of what are we trying to do. There may be other goals that come out of the process as well, but really we want to do a number of different things, short-term, long-term. First on the list is some safety improvements at the Page School and the Pipe Stave Hill recreation area. This is something that we've been engaged by the town to help for several months. We want to look at some other interim pedestrian safety measures right outside the front door here, within town center. We want to look at some long-term solutions based on needs that we might hear from you. Where are the areas that you see challenges, whether safety or capacity or sidewalk connectivity, that we might be able to address with a longer-term type of project. Those are likely to involve funds that are elsewhere outside of town, which is good. Because the state controls and owns Main Street 113 all the way through town. We also want to look at solutions that may be consistent with the other topics that, whether it's tables here or next week, about housing initiatives or land use changes, things that we can be proactive to try to look at transportation solutions that match and are consistent with the changes in land, the types of uses. So who will be involved? Most importantly, you. This is your town, this is your roadway, and this is a process where we hope that beyond tonight, and the folks that are watching on TV or online can participate actively, because the greater the level of participation makes a better project. We have a number of the West Newbury boards and commissions and committees, the folks that have a regulatory capacity within the town or an executive capacity in town to help with decision making and provide that input. The other officials, Angus, the police chief, others, the town planner, and Christine Wallace in the red vest, that is the town's project manager, program manager for infrastructure projects. So she will be the town's main contact representing the town of West Newbury, and we've been very collaborative in what we've done to date. We look forward to more. Our Merrimack Valley Planning Commission, they have a table over here on the left. They are the regional planning experts, both transportation and land use, that have supported the town and the region in some of those solutions. The Massachusetts Department of Transportation, again, the entity that owns and controls Main Street. They are responsible for the maintenance. They're responsible for the operations. So we will be working with them. We are working with them in a number of different ways. First is with different permit applications. And you'll hear more at the end of the presentation about some pedestrian crossing improvements at the Page School. We would be looking for other targeted grant funds that might be used to help improve things in interim measure. And in looking at the potential for a a transportation improvement program project, a larger scale project. Excuse me. We also will be engaging other stakeholders like the Kentucky schools, the West Newbury Riding and Driving Club, for the different users that come across or engage in the corridor. And then finally, our team, myself, Rebecca, and others from TEC, that will help in the planning process and the design process as we move forward. When we look at the regional planning process, it's something that the folks at MVPC are involved with every single day. It involves a series of things that on a regional level in the Merrimack Valley deal with the transportation plan, not just within West Newbury, but elsewhere in the entire region. The ability to tap into different planning programs, other resources, but ultimately help the Metropolitan Planning Organization identify transportation improvement projects on a regional scale. It is a competitive process. It's something that can be done not only for these larger projects, but to also work collaboratively with them for what they're doing now for the Vision Zero safety initiatives. Essentially, the initiative to try to have zero fatalities on our road system. So this is a regional process, but we also have a state level process that we go through, and we are at stage 1. This is the earliest, the infancy of the program process. Might be a little blurry, but it starts with the identification of the problems, the needs, or the opportunities. And this process graphic on the right is we're essentially at step 1 of stage 1 to be in listening mode. As one of my early mentors taught me a long time ago, you know, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so play the odds. Essentially, listen more than speaking. So throughout this small presentation, I'll give you the background, but what is most important is that we can learn those experiences from you. So whether it's immediately after the presentation, and after the other subsequent presentation, please come up. And we've had several interested folks already that have provided helpful notes that we can aggregate to give us an impression of at least the group that's here tonight, and others that may provide comments online or through Christine to aggregate all those things so that we are better informed about the things that you know and you experience. So as far as some of the planning concepts, the ideas, and what are we looking at? For those of you that don't know, but there is actually 5 miles of Main Street, Route 113 in town. From southwest to northeast, as you get towards Newburyport and the I-95 corridor, there's 5 miles of state roadway in the town. To date, we've compiled some of the aerial mapping that you see here. We've done a high-level inventory of the sidewalks, where they exist, where they don't, what the roadway characteristics are like, and we will be collecting other crash data and traffic data as well. As I mentioned before, we'll be working with MVPC in the town to look at the synergies of the transportation planning process and other safety initiatives, and the timing's perfect with the things that the town is doing now so that it is an integral process and everyone's communicating. But ultimately, our goal is to identify improvements that can address the needs that we may hear from you. Some of them may be initial recommendations that we would do at a high level, conceptual level, that we would do in a meeting like today, but at a point in the future when we have some thoughts, again, after listening. But ultimately, to help the town to go through an application process to submit an actual application for project need with the goal of soliciting state interest in activating a project that, whether short-term or long-term, in whole or in segments, can improve the Main Street corridor. So when we look at that 5 miles in town, the west end carries about 6,000 cars per day. And that's based on 2022 data that I believe might have actually been collected by MVPC. That area near the Pentucket Middle and High School has a speed zone of 35 miles an hour or 20 during the arrival and dismissal. There's obviously a lot of school-related traffic that occurs regionally to drop off and pick up at the end of the day. In the town center area, there are obviously more cross streets. On the fringes of town, there are a lot of other closed neighborhood segments particularly in the north, is you go along the river. That doesn't invite a lot of cross traffic unless you're in the center of town, you know, with the bridge over the Merrimack or other connectivity to roads to the south. With that, you know, the types of activity, the businesses, town offices here, there's more pedestrian activity in this central core of town. And just as a perspective for walking distances and time, if you're to walk from Prospect to Training Field, it's about a 10-minute walk, and there is an existing sidewalk in that stretch, but it ends at Training Field. As we look towards the east end, the traffic actually ticks up, and this is data that we collected this year as part of the work we're doing at the Page School. It's up to 8,500 vehicles per day, and a lot of that is that filtering of traffic that heads towards the highway interchanges on 95. The other characteristic is that the speed zones and the actual operating speeds really start to elevate as you get towards the east. So the speed zones of 40 to 50 miles per hour, we actually measured it with one of our traffic recording devices, and in the vicinity of the Page School, where it's a 40-mile-an-hour zone, it was actually at 47 miles per hour. So you probably have all experienced that, whether driving or walking along the edge of the road, to know when there's just a high volume or high speed of those that are passing by you. You've all seen it every day, but just to show a couple of representative images, really because there are different needs in different areas that we've already seen. With here, the roadway shoulders, or that room that's outside the white line to the edge of the road, those shoulder widths vary from west to east along the entire corridor. Some areas it's only a few feet, could be as much as 6 or 7 feet, but on average it's about a 5-foot shoulder, which can accommodate bikes in most sections, but maybe not comfortably, given the speeds of those that are driving by. We also have sidewalks and driveways in certain stretches, and you can see one of the serpentine driveways on one of the curves towards the west end of the corridor. We have a variety of intersections, most of which are unsignalized, stop sign controlled. We have the Crane Neck Street signal here. We also have different one pedestrian signal in the center of town. There are different needs, but as I heard already from a number of residents earlier this evening, there's not a sense that there's a whole lot of congestion in town. And it's consistent with what we've seen. It's more about the safety aspects. How does a user of a car or a pedestrian or a bicyclist feel in using the roadway? But if there are hotspots, one of the things that we'll be doing subsequent to tonight is collecting intersection traffic data at some of the key locations where we count every single left, right, through vehicle on every single approach, so we can look at the opportunities if there's an appropriate change in the type of traffic control that exists. We also have different sidewalks and topographic or slope considerations, which has probably led the state and or the town to date in where the sidewalks are positioned or where they're not positioned. Here, near the west end of the corridor, just east of Farm Lane, there is a sidewalk on the north side of the road. There's no buffers. You've got the utility poles, but there's no sidewalk on the south side because you can see the steep slope that comes down right to the edge of the road. As we head towards the training field, it's a lot more level. There's not any of the side slope considerations, but we have historic properties, things that we need to be sensitive to. But you can see in this image where we've got the sidewalk with a small buffer on the north side, but there's room to do it on the south side, you know, as you approach the old town hall. But then we also have crosswalks. Certain ones that are well controlled, like the signal near Maple Street. Others that have some signs but not others. Some that connect to a sidewalk on the other side, or in this case near the old town hall. There's a landing that's really in the middle of the parking lot. But then others right outside the front door here, where unfortunately there was a pedestrian fatality not too long ago. I'm sorry, crash. With that, we're going to be looking to work with the town and with the state to look at some interim improvement measures, signs, more visible crosswalks, or maybe even some of the flashing warning devices like we're looking at the Page School, to make it more of a prominent location to improve those safety characteristics. Ultimately, what we hope to hear from all of you is where you see the needs. That could be anything from the pedestrian connections to accessibility, EDA, the architectural access board requirements for accommodations for those that have disabilities or challenges, whether it's visual, those that use wheelchairs. There are segments of sidewalks that might need to be improved, ramps that need to be improved, bicycle accommodations. With roadways like Main Street that has I'm going to call it a moderate traffic volume but higher speeds, the data tells us and the research tells us that bicyclists are not comfortable in just a 5-foot swath. They would prefer to have another buffer. A lot of the state guidelines these days suggest that wherever the speeds are 40 miles per hour or greater, the facility should really consider some sort of buffered facility or off-road facility to try to better accommodate bicyclists. In town center, we might consider traffic calming measures. There might be an opportunity with the increased pedestrian traffic in the village area that maybe there's some bump outs at intersections that frame out where cars park, but shorten the crossing distances. We can look at some targeted intersection improvements. Is there a particular location that might need a left turn lane to try to improve safety? Roadside safety. You know, there are sections that might beg for new or improved or additional guardrail features. Roadway lighting, in particular in areas of crosswalks, that can significantly, lighting alone can really significantly improve nighttime safety at crosswalks and even along roadways. But I think that's one of those things that is a context-sensitive design that may be appropriate in some areas and yet not in others. Pavement quality or other things that aren't listed here, that's really, you know, the options and ideas for the things that we would love to hear about. So as we look at the 5 miles, we actually have 5 different focus areas. And going from west to east, right in front of the Pentucket schools, the aerial image, because the construction just got done, is a little outdated, but we have this great photo of what exists today. So the different turning movements in and out of the school, pedestrian operations and activities where folks, students that are visiting the pizza shop, excuse me, but other things to improve the facility. Second focus area in the village, looking at, again, there are some additional sidewalks here already, but what can we do to better identify the areas for traffic and other users? Focus area 3, as we head in front of the town offices here, safety complex, and then head up to the east on the way to the training field. You know, some of the challenges that we look at with the crossings or the lack of sidewalks on the south side of the road. You saw a couple of images already of the section as we head towards training field, but that is the end of that sidewalk infrastructure from there to the east. So what we'd love to hear is for those that would like to walk or bike but don't feel comfortable, where are those other future connections? One thing we looked at was different great state grant sources. What could we potentially do to try to provide connectivity to the Page School? There are some challenges in doing that, but if there's a will and there's a need and a desire, we could pursue the idea of expanding the sidewalks beyond where they end today. The final focus area is at the Page School in Pipestave. This is an area of a lot of, again, school-related traffic, recreational traffic, equestrian use, pedestrian use, in an area that has some pretty tight slopes, some limited sight lines, but a lot of activity depending on the events that may occur at one or the other or both facilities. The image in the lower left is taken along Main Street looking up the hill. This is one of those areas that is constrained. It's what we call a cut section of roadway, where a gazillion years ago when the state built it, the land used to do this, and they cut the road into the hillside, so there's some steep slopes. Trying to get sidewalks here would require slope modifications or retaining walls. But again, if there's a need for the facility, that's the types of things that we would like to plan as part of future infrastructure. The crossing itself was actually part of an earlier assignment that we've been working with the town on. As far as some of the history of that need, we've been working with the select board, with the town manager, Christine, and MassDOT to advance a design that started as a concept and got a lot of input from the public. We actually had a group of stakeholders that met to do what we call a safety audit in front of Page School to identify different needs and specific opportunities there. The town's been proactive in looking at some state grants that have been used in conjunction with local funds to fund the work that we're doing. We did presentations to the select board in May of '22 and earlier this year to present the design, and that allowed us to submit to the state formally. That is what we call 25% level design, and I'll show you an image in a moment. That current cost estimate to do the improvements with sidewalks and crossing flashing warning devices is about $240,000, but there is an opportunity where that may increase depending on coordination with the school property in possibly reconstructing a retaining wall. That's like an old rubble wall there to try to improve the width of the facilities on the driveway, and then also provide a sidewalk in that same area. Ultimately, we'll be working with the town, with the school, incorporating the comments and then advancing to the final stages of design in the coming months. So as a little bit more detailed concept, a little bit more blown up so you can see the scope of what we're doing, trying to have a sidewalk that would connect to that secondary chained driveway at the school property that would come around in the area of that retaining wall, and then have a more enhanced crossing of Main Street, not only for pedestrians, but for the equestrian riders as well. At the crosswalk, that would replace this diagonal crosswalk that exists today, kind of going from nowhere to nowhere, or within the intersection to another intersection. This would actually create a shorter, more well-defined crosswalk that has a shorter distance. It's envisioned to have a more highly visible crosswalk, new ADA ramps, and a sidewalk that would come along and then enter the Pipestave driveway. Right behind that would be a wide gravel area that the horses could walk on, with a separate crosswalk to get to a gravel apron here for those that head up in the trail system up and beyond the water tower. This is the type of device that you would see. You might have seen them elsewhere in the adjacent towns. The town of Groveland has a couple. Newburyport has a couple that we had worked with the city on. It's called a RRFB, or Rectangular Rapid Flash Beacon. Long way of saying it's a flashing warning device. It has lights that flash when somebody pushes the button. The difference with this location is we're actually going to try to make it adaptable so that it meets the pedestrian needs at the ADA height. But we're also going to have a supplemental push button that's up higher so that any of the riders could actually push it while still staying mounted. That can activate the warning light system immediately once it's pushed to allow those to cross in a better location that's more visible and is complemented with those warning devices that can be seen well down the road. So how can you help? Again, this is just the infancy of our process. I wanted to give you the overview, but we hope that you can describe your use of the roadway, the ways you'd like to use it, if you can't use it that way today. What are the critical gaps in the infrastructure, whether it's stop signs, warning signs, lighting, new sidewalks, whatever it may be. But I would invite you to come up after the other presentation and take a look. And if you say, I just really don't feel comfortable in a particular area, fill out a little sticky or take our Sharpie, mark it up, circle it. Feel free to make as many notes as you want for your observations for what you see as needs. We hope that you will also participate in the future discussions as we develop ideas for how we may address those needs. The email address at the bottom, dpwprojects@wnewbury.org. That goes right to Christine. So if you think of something beyond tonight, or you don't feel comfortable coming to the table or writing it, feel free to send an email, particularly those that are watching it online after the fact, so that we can have as much of a broadcast of interest as possible. So that's the summary of the presentation for the Main Street corridor. Again, we are not full of ideas yet. We want to be in the absorption mode tonight, but we look forward to engaging with the town. Thank you.
All right, welcome. Thank you everybody for sticking around for this presentation. My name is Leela Pike. I am with GEI Consultants in Portland, Maine, actually. I am a civil engineer. I focus a lot of my work on flood vulnerability and adaptation studies in riverine environments and coastal environments. And here with me today is Gail Bonus. I'm going to speak first, and then I'll hand it over to Gail. She's with GMRI, also the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, GMRI for short, also in Portland. So we are excited to be working on this project with West Newbury. We just recently started. It is a flood vulnerability and adaptation study for River Road. So just a quick outline of the presentation that I'll be giving. I'll talk about the MVP program, which is one of the major funding sources for this project, the project goals and methods, community engagement events for you all to participate in the next steps as we begin this project. So the MVP program stands for the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program. It is a state of Massachusetts program. It provides funding and support for cities and towns to identify climate hazards, assess vulnerabilities, and develop action plans to improve resilience to climate change. They have a big emphasis on community engagement and feedback, and the town of West Newbury was a recipient of a $150,000 grant funding, the last round of the grant. So for this project, we have a few major goals. We will be focusing primarily on River Road, roughly from Bridge Street to Coffin Street. And our big question is, what is the flood risk of River Road? What will experience flooding and when? What are the areas that are really the most vulnerable? We also want to look at bank erosion. So not only where is the road flooding or at risk of flooding, but how is the current bank performing? Are there areas, and we know there are areas of erosion. What are the areas of concern? What are the areas we don't need to be concerned about yet, but maybe we will need to be concerned about in the future? We want to find those out. We're also, as part of the study, evaluating the culverts along River Road and a little bit farther into the town too. We want a baseline evaluation of the conditions of those culverts. So are they performing as they should be? Are they in good working order? Are they crushed? Are they filled with sediment? Are they too small? We're going to be headed out into the field to figure that out. And one of the final products for this study will be a broad report about adaptation methods and bank stabilization options for next steps. So we'll do the work to identify it, and then we'll offer some solutions. And we like to always do these projects so that you're really set up to get that next round of funding to then really go in and do that work. So that's always our goal. And there will be a strong emphasis on community engagement. All right, so let us talk about West Newbury. So West Newbury, circled here along the Merrimack River. So when we talk about flooding in West Newbury, there are a few different sources of where that's coming from. It is obviously on a river, so we are subject to river flows. The river here is tidal, so we are also subject to coastal storm surge and sea level rise. In addition, when you just talk about flooding in general, you can also have overland flooding, so major rain events that are acting directly on West Newbury. There's major rain events that increase the river flow coming down the river, and then there's the ones that are happening right on West Newbury, and then we have the coastal storm surge coming up the river and the effect of sea level rise. So as part of this study, we will not be looking at all of these methods, although we will try to, so I'll talk about that a little bit more as we go on. Oh, before I go to this slide, I have put a little star here where there is a USGS river gauge. This gauge measures the stage of the river and also the river flow. So it's upstream of West Newbury, upriver, but we can get a good sense of the tidal action in the river at that location. So here we are, that's what this graph is. So this is recently, the last week or so. We're looking at the tidal stage in the river at that gauge location, and the river fluctuates about 6.5 feet between high tide and low tide. So there's a huge tidal influence here, which is really important because when we talk about sea level rise, that will affect the stage of the river at West Newbury. So since it's a tidally influenced river, we are going to experience flooding due to coastal storm surge, sea level rise, as well as the extreme riverine events. The extreme riverine events are not included in this study because we are using an existing model that we will talk about in a couple slides. So here's an interesting slide of the December 23rd, 2022 storm event. So this was right before Christmas, I guess just a year ago. It felt like longer ago, but it's just a year ago. You all probably remember that storm. There was some pretty major flooding. I live in Maine. There was a lot of flooding there. And I want to show you what that gauge looked like during that storm. So you can see we have our up and down, up and down, and up and down. There's this one, there's kind of this was from the USGS website. They did not change the color of their lines, but there's one line down here that isn't going up and down as much. That line represents the flow of the river, the volume of water moving down the river. This one is representing the height of the river. So it's going up and down, up and down, up and down with the tides. And then storm surge comes in, and that peak river stage, which is about 3 feet higher than your typical high tide, comes in due to that storm surge. This storm also included some pretty major precipitation. so that flow of the river is increased, which keeps that river stage up a little bit, although it's not quite as high from the river event. That peak coastal storm surge is really what caused that main flooding. And then we head back down after the storm ends. So this kind of gives you a picture of what the river experiences during those coastal storm events. All right, so back to our goals. Our first one, understand flood risk. We are going to be looking at flood risk due to coastal storm surge, sea level rise, how that risk changes in the future due to sea level rise. So we're going to be looking at near term, medium term, and long term. And that allows the town to really plan for what should be adapted or addressed soon and what we don't really need to worry about in terms of planning and funding. So here's an image of that December 23rd event, and there is some flooding along River Road. Okay, so one of the methods for doing this study is using the Massachusetts Coastal Flood Risk Model. This is a probabilistic model developed by Woods Hole Group for the whole state of Massachusetts. It uses very sophisticated coastal modeling methods. It has a really detailed modeling grid. It goes up the Merrimack River, and the way that it is probabilistic is, in a general sense, is they developed a model of the coast. They developed 1,000 hypothetical storm events. Now, these storm events have different parameters. There's different wind speeds, there's different offshore wave heights, there's different directions that they come in, there's different atmospheric pressure. Every storm is different. So they had a set of 1,000, 1,100, and they did this whole set on the Massachusetts coast. And so then make it 1,100 different water levels. And from that database, they can figure out what that 1% annual chance water level is. 1% annual chance water level is what would happen. There'd be a 1% likelihood of this happening in any given year. We also refer to this as the 100-year storm. So that might be a little more familiar to you. If you look at FEMA maps, those are the 100-year storm events. So as part of their study that they did, they included sea level rise in their 1,100 storms. So they did the 1,100 storms for today's levels and for 3 different rates of sea level rise. So there were a ton of model results that they had to look at. And here's just an example from the website. So we have access to this data. We'll be using this data to identify areas at risk of River Road. This model included average riverine flows. It did not include extreme river events for the Merrimack River. So this is one way that this study is like our initial study of what's most at risk, what might be becoming more at risk, and there are ways that we can improve upon this as we need to down the road. So sea level rise. All these graphs all typically look the same. Everything starts down low and it just gets worse as we look out into the future. This particular graph represents the sea level rise projections from NOAA from the year 2022. So these are their latest projections developed in coordination with the International Panel on Climate Change on the latest climate science around greenhouse gas projections, etc. So this is for Boston. It's our closest location to here for sea level rise projections. And we have a series of solid lines and then some bands around those lines. Those bands represent the uncertainty. So you can see as we get out into the future, there's much more uncertainty. Part of that is because sea level rise is going to depend on our greenhouse gas emissions, which depend on policies, and we don't know, we can't predict what that will be in the future. But the climate scientists agree that sea level is rising. It is just how much it will be rising. So this study used 3 rates of sea level rise: 1.2 feet, 2.4 feet, and 4.2 feet. So if we put those generally on that high trend of sea level rise, we can talk about them in terms of near term, around 2040, medium term around 2060, long term around 2080. But for each of these heights, you could see that you really are in a range of time frames. So I think of it more as the smaller amount of sea level rise, and medium amount of sea level rise, and a higher amount of sea level rise. All right, so our next goal for this project is to identify areas of bank erosion. Gail and I drove the road today. We saw the area where there's some new rocks that are stabilizing the bank. We will be looking at historical imagery. We will also be conducting a drone survey. So this drone survey is one of our public community events. I'll talk about the date a little bit more later, but we're thinking approximately, tentatively, the first week of December. As we get closer, we'll look at the weather and really find a day. We will advertise that. We'll find a location where there's enough parking for people to come check it out. We'll have our engineers out there flying the drones, somebody there to speak with you. And we'll be flying the drone along the bank at low tide so that we can really identify those areas where the bank might be unstable. We will also be evaluating the culverts. So we will be sending people out in the field to locate all of the culverts, document them, figure out how big they are, what condition they're in, survey their elevations upstream and downstream. And then we will be creating another model that is looking at the overland flow from rain events on West Newberry. So how those culverts perform during different storm precipitation events, if there are any that may be undersized that could benefit from having a larger culvert. And then as a result of this, we will be providing the town with some very broad adaptation and stabilization options. So here's a figure from the International Panel on Climate Change of some general methods or philosophies around adaptation to flooding. So here we have no response, so you don't do anything, it floods, maybe your house gets damaged, eventually you'll have to move. We have protection, so that is keep the water out, build a wall, don't let the water come in. Accommodation is let the water still come in, but you're going to accommodate it. So you will raise your house or somehow let the water in to not damage your infrastructure. We have advance, which is kind of a combination. You protect this area and then you can build beyond it, kind of move out. I actually think they moved out a little bit into the water. Retreat is to retreat from the area, and then ecosystem-based adaptation, which is using some green infrastructure to slow down that wave action and potential flooding. For bank stabilization, there's also a range from greener methods to grayer methods. So grayer is your typical civil engineering, build a retaining wall, put some riprap abetment along. We saw those new rocks on River Road. A lot of times, if storms happen and towns have not yet planned for what they want their bank to look like or their road to look like that's exposed, and a storm happens and that area gets damaged, that leads to what we like to call reactionary engineering, which is we need to fix this now, and so we are going to put in some rocks or build a wall because we have no other plan in place, and that's the easiest method to really solve that right now. When you have some more time to think about it, You can start looking more into living shorelines methods or do some combination of green and gray infrastructure or building in those native plants and thinking about how you want River Road to look. All right, so I'm going to talk about the first event and then I'm going to hand it over to Gail. So upcoming events, this date is not correct. We're not looking at the next week. We have some handouts on our table which have the correct date, but the next upcoming event, likely in combination the same week as this community presentation, would be the drone survey. So we're looking at about 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, and as soon as we really solidify that day, we will let everybody know. And now I'll hand it off to Gail.
Which button do you press?
The red one.
Gotcha, fancy. Thank you, Leela. Hi all, I'm Gail Bonus. As Leela said, I'm with the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, and I manage our Municipal Climate Action Program, and a big piece of the work that we do is providing community engagement support for projects like the one that GEI is leading through the MVP grant here with West Newbury. And a big piece of that also kind of follows the same themes as what TEC was stating earlier. This work can't be done without your input. We don't want to create a road that doesn't reflect your needs for it, your values for it, your vision for it, and thinking about a community as a whole as opposed to just the residents of that road as well. So today we're collecting some input at the table just behind you there. If you're interested, you can swing on by and post some stickers on locations of areas that you value along River Road and surrounding areas of concern where you may have seen some flooding or erosion. That's the type of information that's going to help us kind of hone in particular when GEI gets out there, like boots on the ground or drones in the air, to make these observations. Will help us know kind of these areas to investigate a little bit further. We'll also be looking for kind of your help throughout the way too, and to kind of support that, we also want to do some knowledge building. I know you all consider yourselves to be a riverine community, but you may not consider yourselves to be a coastal community. And thinking about the tides and the fact that sea level rise is really going to impact this community might be a new concept. So we're going to be doing some knowledge building on December 7th. We'll host a virtual hop on Zoom. I'm sure everybody's familiar with like an online presentation by now. You're probably very sick of it, but you can settle in with a glass of wine if you'd like from home, and we'll just talk sea level rise. It'll be a very accessible presentation. We'll dig into some of the data. It's I don't like to talk for too long, so a lot of discussion and questions and answers, and an opportunity too for you all to share stories with your community members and hear from others around your concerns and flood impacts that you may have seen. But we'll dig into that data and we'll better understand what those projections and maps look like for River Road and the broader community. So that's on December 7th. We'll advertise that and have a registration with a link for you to sign up for that. Some other ways that you can contribute is we could use your boots on the ground. So this year we're working on adding West Newbury to an existing community science project, and I'm going to talk more about that in just a little bit, so hang tight on that. But there's some upcoming predicted high waters or high tides that may result in some sunny day flooding, nuisance flooding, king tide flooding. It's kind of the flooding of many names. It's flooding that happens when there's no storm events. So we want to capture that. So we'll be hosting some events through a community science challenge through early part of next year, and that's a great place to participate. And then we'll also be developing some interactive maps at the later part of this project where you can hop on and be able to view all of this data that's being generated, zoom in and around to see what that looks like within your community, and we'll also contextualize it within kind of the narratives and the stories that we've been hearing from you all throughout this project. And at the end of this project, which is in June of next year, Leela and I, along with the team here in West Newbury, will be doing some community site visits, producing a report, and we'll also host another meeting where you all can kind of hear about those findings. All right, so I'm going to dig into these two projects just to share with you a little bit more about what they are, as you will be, they're work that we've done before, and in particular with this project, you'll be joining a larger community. And just to start too, just to state that we do all of our work with wanting to really understand what it is that you all value about your community and really hear your voices at the forefront of that. And again, that's reflective of looking for your input today. So I'm going to talk about community science or citizen science. How many of you have participated in a community science or citizen science project before? Great. Okay, so a few of you are familiar with that. And the goals of doing a community or citizen science project is that we have really big questions and really large ground to cover, or lots of data to sort through. So citizen or scientists or communities will put these questions out to a larger group of people and give them directions or protocols to follow in order to analyze that data or collect that data, help answer that question. There's just not enough PhDs to do it all. So that's where you all come in, is in getting out there and collecting that data. So GMRI hosts several of these projects on our Ecosystem Investigation Network, and you all will be joining the Coastal Flood Community Science Project on there. We've been doing this work throughout Maine. We're up to, I think, maybe 15 to 20 communities. You'll be our first outside of the state, so I'm personally really excited about that. We'll be working, actually we already did work with the town. We've identified 5 coastal flood monitoring sites. I'm showing you South Portland right here as an example. So these are locations that'll be along River Road, and they are areas that are currently vulnerable to flooding today, areas that are publicly accessible along River Road, and places where you all can stop and collect some data. So before this evening, Leila and I came down earlier this afternoon and drove and took some photos along that road to start generating content to get you guys up on this website by the end of this year. In the early part of 2024, we'll be hosting 3 community science challenges where West Newbury will join the other 20 communities that are part of this project to go out and collect data during these high water events. And that's because high water happens at the same time essentially everywhere, so we really need to get a large community of folks out to collect that data. So a community challenge event, we will be hosting within 48 hours of that high tide, a virtual presentation and training on how to go out and collect data and why your data matters and what we'll be doing with that data. And then you'll join a community partner, which will likely be somebody from the MVP program or the Resilience Committee here in town, out at a coastal flood monitoring site along River Road during that high water event to run through that protocol and collect that data. And hopefully that gets you guys comfortable with going out and collecting data on your own. And it's a really simple process. There's an online platform, so it's an online form to fill out. Take some photos with your smartphone if you have one, hop online, and you're gonna upload those photos, answer a couple of multiple choice questions to help us better understand what weather and water conditions are leading to flooding in these areas, and also why does that matter to you? We want to incorporate that component into this work too, and that will be really important feedback to the community. And then we compare that data alongside with the water level monitor data from the tide gauge that we showed you earlier, so we can know exactly what that flood stage is for those sites. So if you have a predicted high water event of, let's say, 8 feet, you know where the water is going to be along River Road, and we can put out perhaps emergency alerts or block off areas of the road if it's going to be unsafe to travel. The data currently is accessible on the site in this matter. You can sort by location, date, type of flooding. This year we have an NSF grant, National Science Foundation grant, to develop a digital viewer of this data, and we're really excited about that. So it's going to look a little bit different in a year, but as a member of this project, you guys will also receive all the benefits through the other funded projects that are working on this too. And it will also continue beyond I think this grant funding ends in June, but once you're up here and collecting data, you guys can continue to upload data well beyond the grant timeline. All right, so the other project, and again, I know we're not in South Portland. These are just examples of the work that we've been doing. We've been working with communities to develop story maps. Is anybody familiar with a story map? Okay, some nodding heads. It's a really user-friendly way of creating a story that's centered in place. So where you can have maps about geolocated data, such as flood data, or looking at point data of like how, like perhaps for this project, zooming into some of those areas of erosion and telling those stories. And it's a way of making that data really accessible to the public. So GEI will be producing a report, which will be for the town and the decision makers. We'll be taking that report and creating a public-friendly interface of that data for you all to have and to interact with and to understand that way. So you don't have to read Leela's engineering report to dig into that. What we do with this data is create your maps. We can put all sorts of layers on here. It doesn't have to be just flood layers. We can put those different pinpoints of areas of interest that are on here as well. One thing that we really encourage, which I think this project is doing too, is to think beyond property level impact and really think about those community impacts broader. And what are the complex kind of side effects of flooding that our community is going to have to grapple with, and what are those bigger solutions that we can come to? We also want to tell the story of place too. So by using the various tools within story maps, we'll develop some local narratives, again, based off of the input that we get from you this evening and throughout the different engagement processes in this project. And I think that wraps it up.